you. So welcome everyone. I'm Alison Watts. I'm here on behalf of the Southern Cross Postgraduate Association. Happy to see you all here this morning and in good hands with Beck Brown, who's going to take you through what we've marketed as a postgrad masterclass for career success. So I'll just keep it short and hand you over to Beck. And Beck, I noticed there's a great question in the chat box from Vasantika when you get to it. So yeah, if people want to, put their mics on or put in the chat box, that's excellent. So have a good session and I'll leave it to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I've actually got a whole set of slides, Vastanika, that I can send to you that we did in the previous series on working in Australia, which should be really helpful or could be really helpful for you. In fact, I've got two sets of slides. So if you wouldn't mind, just pop your email address in there into the chat box and I can send those to you because it talks about tips for working in Australia and things that around requirements and how to work here. So we've got someone else joining us, which is awesome. I'm so pleased. So this is also brought to you by the careers, the SCU careers team. In the careers team, we have staff in Lismore, Coffs Harbour and the Gold Coast. I'm working in conjunction with both the Postgraduate Association and SCU Careers, but they have wonderful, wonderful staff there so that at any point in 6 months' time, 3 months' time, 2 years' time, when you graduate, you can still use their service to help you with your cover letter, your resume, selection criteria, career decision-making, graduate, any sort of graduate program, anything related to your career, they are there and they offer 30-minute consultations. There's no limit how many consultations that you have. And it is, I'll just give you the website, so just so it's keep it really simple, SCU Careers, SCU Careers. And they have just the most amazing team there that are able, thank you, able to help you with anything that you need after this series. So what I was just explaining to the students that were here a little bit earlier, the session today is an overview of, it's a snapshot of what we consider are the key components to success with your career. And so I'm going to be touching on each of those sections. And then each week, each Friday, we will be here. We've got another 3 weeks after this where we will dive more deeply into those. So for example, we'll talk more about the cover letter, which can often get very, very overlooked in the whole recruitment process, the resume, and so on. So today, please, as I said, for those of you that have joined late, you're most welcome to, if there's points in this presentation today or workshop that you'd like me to spend a little bit more time on, please feel free to pop your mic on and or to pop the chat box, type into the chat box something else that you would like to know about. Oh, yes. Able to access this career service? Yes, you sure are. Yeah, and I think that often students don't realize that they're allowed to, that they have that access afterwards. Generally speaking, as far as I know, it's 2 years after you graduate. And so what can happen is that you'll find a graduate position and then there'll be a period of time where you perhaps want to make a change, or you'd like to build on what you've done, or you run into normal situations that happen in work where there's redundancy or restructuring, and then you need that support. So and often students don't realize that that opportunity is there for 2 years. I'll also pop a couple of other, just in case. I'm always conscious that I may never see you again. So I'll just, while I think of it, I'll pop in a couple of other helpful resources. Resume Worded is, so it's just Resume Worded. If, for example, you can't come to next week, you're never getting around to reading it, that's an amazing automatic. It does it checks your resume in, I think it's like 1 or 2 minutes. Don't be horrified by the percentage score that it gives you. But it tells you how, for free, you can drop your resume in there. So that's an amazing tool. And another one, just again, while I think of it, Career One offer I think it's just www.careerone.careerone. They offer both a resume review done by a computer, and also a human being will also look at your resume. So you get some interesting personal feedback, and then you get the automation as well. And I'll talk more about automation. So that's another tool that I find. And again, it might seem a little bit early but just in case, you get busy, just take a snapshot of those. And there's one other one that I was thinking at this stage would be helpful. Oh, I'm not promoting this recruitment company. I have no contact with them, but they do have an amazing. So Hayes is a recruitment company in Sydney. They've been around for decades, and they have a really, really good template on there, a resume template that automatic tracking systems really love. So again, if you happen to miss next week, you get really busy and you need to know my top tips of extra, just off the top of my head, there's tons of resources available, but they're just a couple of ones that I don't want to forget to give you. I've had quite a few people that have used the Hayes template. And again, I have no association or affiliation at all with them. I've just found it's a really useful tool, and it's free. You can just download it from their website. Okay, so I might just get, I'm just going to pause the recording to load my slide. It won't let me close the screen unless I pause it. So just give me one moment. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it. Okay, so here we go. Here's Claire back again. In preparation for this workshop last night, I was thinking about, so I've been involved in careers for probably about 15 years. And I was thinking about, how I bring forward the importance and the value of knowing yourself, the self component of the career development process and success, and how I make it clear to you, or not clear to you, but how I bring that into the limelight for you as one of the primary actions to take. What happens is that when we look for work, and I'll come back to some of those slides, when we look for work, we often look for work from a place of fear, trepidation, and these are all normal, human feelings, part of the human condition. Anticipation. Sometimes we look for work from the position of less than, particularly if we're going into a new field, like we're not good enough, or that we don't have enough to offer. How will we perform in this role? How will we transition with our PhD or our postgraduate qualifications? And what I think often, or what I have observed, and I've observed this in myself and many people that I've worked with, is that we dive into that space without taking the time to really understand, value, and communicate what we can offer, the potential employer. So really, this is the place to start. And what happens is that by not knowing what we specifically have to offer, we're not able to communicate that to the potential employer. And therefore, it can be difficult to stand out. So here is an example of a student that applied for 526 job applications and had no interviews. And then went on to change tact. And often, you know, we do the same thing over and over and over again, and we often, you know, expect something different. And again, we do it in all areas of our lives, and it's pretty normal. Until we get fed up or something happens, break a leg, and we have to do things differently. You know, we can't run that marathon anymore, or whatever it is. It can take us a long time for us to choose a different path and to try something different. And so in this case, and this is a real example, they changed tactics. So this gentleman changed tactics. He tailored each application based upon his strengths. Now, it's very hard to communicate your strengths to an employer if you don't know what they are. And it's hard to convince somebody else of what your strengths are if you haven't spent the time to learn what they are, but also to value them for yourself, all right? Because particularly when we are feeling vulnerable about making a transition, we're not actually confident of what those strengths are. So I really encourage you, and I love it that you guys are here and you're here face to face and that you're hearing this, because hopefully you're not applying for positions today or tomorrow, and you can start, you know, you can start this approach straight away. So you will have that time before you go into applying for a position to really unpack what your strengths may be. So once this gentleman was able to bring forward each of his strengths and communicate those, he got 4 calls back from 7 for each of 7 applications. And then there was 12 days between the final application and selecting a job offer. And what I've observed this in myself, and I've observed it, and I'm not ashamed, I'm no expert, is that the applying for jobs can be tiring, and we want to just kind of keep saying the same thing and flicking it out there and having a passive approach where we just, and then we can say, oh, well, there's no jobs out there, or I haven't got the right qualifications. And then it can keep us in a place of staying, perhaps not achieving to our greatest potential. And also perhaps not attracting, without sounding like a complete hippie, although I am a little hippie at heart, that we're not attracting, because the attraction comes by the way that we communicate, the most suitable employer where you'll be a really good fit and have a good time. So how do we go about building our self-awareness? I'd encourage you, I'm happy, I'll send it at the end of this series, I'll send a copy, I'll send a final email with an attachment of all the slides. I love it when you guys come here face to face, because it makes it more worthwhile in terms of any feedback and any questions that you ask are often so helpful for other people, and And so I'm really grateful when you do come, if you can, come along live. But I would take a screenshot of this particular, welcome Nee, you haven't missed too much. We're just talking about this, about self-awareness in preparing to go out into the workforce. So if you spend time working through each of these 6 elements associated with who you are in the lead up to your entry transition into the workforce, you will be really, really well set up. Because it's one thing to spend ages working on a resume, but if the resume isn't communicating who you really are, then it's you may not necessarily find yourself in the most suitable. And it's not to say you won't, but the more preparation, it's like preparing for, it's laying the foundations. So when you lay the foundations for finding the sort of work that you want, and I find that most people are here, at university because they want to find fulfilling work. If you lay the foundation, then there's a really good chance that you will find and maintain suitable work. So I'm just going to come back, and perhaps given we've got 2 hours here, and I would like to pause here, and I'd like you to take let's take 5 minutes. Just grab a piece of paper and a pen or on your phone. And I want you, so that I'm not just, it's kind of a talking head here. I do have a lot to cover today, but remember, this is just a snapshot. We're going to dive more deeply into all of this over the next couple of weeks. I want you to see if you can write 1 or a couple of points for each of these. So what's your personality like? Are you outgoing? Do you like to learn? Do you prefer a quiet space? Prefer to work, to have time to reflect and then contribute? What are your skills? So you'll have what we call technical skills and employability skills. So your technical skills will be associated with the field of work or the area of your expertise. So if you're doing, your PhD, then you'll have, of course, a range of research skills. You'll have skills associated with the technical components or the specific discipline. What motivates you? What gets you up in the morning? Do you have a love of learning? Do you love to incorporate sport, philosophy, ongoing study? Obviously, some part of you enjoys studying. And then your values are what's important to you. Because knowing what's important to you and then looking for work and looking for employers that communicate what's important to them, you're going to have a really nice, well, ideally speaking, you'll have, or the likelihood is greater that your working life will be more enjoyable. Your interests. So what are your interests? And you can communicate these, anything that's associated with the field of work that you love. So you might be interested in, community development or volunteering, or so when you're communicating that to the employer, ideally, the best is to communicate your interests tailored specifically for the field of work that you're going into. And then where are you heading? And that's what we call SMART goals. So a SMART goal is something that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So what's a SMART goal? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'll just pause the recording so that people at home aren't waiting those couple of minutes. Just reading what you guys are doing. PhD in education. Amazing. Grad dip in business. So handy. Project management. Wonderful. So each of those three professions, and I'll just talk while you guys just keep taking some notes, or each of those, so project management, business, education, there are a multitude of ways that you can take that academic learning and find meaningful work. So project management, it could be corporate, it could be not-for-profit, it could be in education, it could be in community development. Such an exciting area of study, because it can be applied to so many settings and you know, organizations of any shape, size or form. Same with business. Business, when we're studying business, it can be challenging to find where to go with business, because in fact, everything that is generating income, even not for profits, are still a business. And so those same areas of work, so, you know, hairdressers is a business, a not-for-profit is a business, a university is a business, and all businesses, even those that, you know, are in government or in not-for-profit, still need to function as a business. So I find that people can sometimes, that are studying business, you know, get a bit not lost, but just not sure about where to go. And that can be some of the challenges with careers these days, you know, so many options. And then, but also so many, sometimes we have too many options. So it's a double-edged sword. Education, there's early childhood, there is offshore education, you know, global education, there is disability education, there is teaching English as a second language education, there's education in universities, there's tertiary education, there's vocational education. So that, again, there's so many ways. Oh yeah, please. So question around employability and my pathway to perm. Okay, yes. And my question is around how best can I write my statement of intention for jobs? We'll ask the question during our Q&A. Oh yeah, that would be great. Yeah, sure. Yeah, please do that, because I'm not sure what a statement of intention is. And but yes, let's do that. And also, if it's helpful for you, if you type your email address in there, Vasanatika, was also interested in some information around transitioning to work in Australia. So I did a couple of slides, I ran a couple of presentations in the last series of workshops. So if you pop your email address in there, I can send you those slides. But yeah, please pop the mic on at the end. That would be awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks for making sure you get what you need from this workshop. We've got about half of the enrollments here, so that's great. But the more questions, so that you can go away, if you're creating this 2 hours and committing that 2 hours, I want to make sure that, that I'm able to add that extra value for you. So how did you guys go with, anybody like to share things that have come up? I'll pop some resources where you can find some tools related to self-awareness. My Future, they have some really good tools. They have some great resources on there. This one, you may not be able to, oh yes, yep, this one's also a free resource. This is one of my favorites to help with looking at our strengths, the VIA character strengths. This is a study, particularly those of you, well, you're in postgrad, but those of you that are doing PhDs, this is actually done, the VIA character strengths study is done by a group of scientists. That it's a really fascinating study, or I find it really fascinating, that they studied how do I put it, that human beings like innate personal traits. And so what they found is this group of scientists found that all human beings have a constellation, a collection of strengths. And when we know what those strengths are and we learn to use those strengths, we can have maximum impact in both our lives, our communities, and in our professional work. So it's a really fascinating, it's free. The resources on My Future are also free. If you want to learn more about personality, Myers-Briggs, if you haven't already done it, Briggs personality test. I'm not sure where the ones that I use, it's through paid versions through universities, but you should be able to find personality test. This is a really powerful and most commonly used personality test. Then there is another test called the Big 5 Factor Model. These are the two personality tests that are most commonly used when, and in fact, employers are curious about the Big 5 Factor Model. And in short, I'll pop the recording on. Oh, hang on, but would anybody like to share before I pop that on? Share about things that have come up or questions to do with self-awareness or anything you'd like to, please feel free to type in the chat, pop your mic on. I know it's scarier and scarier turning mics on these days because we can type, but please, I'm sure one person pops a mic on, someone else will put the mic on too. I get so sick of listening to myself, so I want to listen to one of you guys.
I'm happy to share.
Oh, please do. Thank you, Katie.
Well, I found it really interesting because when I went to, kind of start it, I thought, oh, personality, that would be easy. And that was actually the one that I found kind of the hardest. I kind of found it easy to say, my skills, my interests, my goals, but I found personality and values kind of the hardest ones to think about. So I think those doing those personality tests and stuff will be really helpful with that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Katie, because there is so much opportunity. I was going to use the word power, but it is actually power, because it gives you more power in your decision making when you look for work that is really in line with what is important to you. So, for example, most people want work-life balance, yeah, just as an example. But that can be more important, at different times in your life, and depending on whatever's going on. But if that is really, really important for you, then you want to make sure. It's a simple example to use, in that you really want to make sure when you're looking at the profession you're going to go into, and then B, the organisations that are offering that sort of work, do they really respect work-life balance? And then how are people in that organisation working? How does that really look? And you can't always find that out. And it's not like you can get on LinkedIn and say, is this really good work-life balance? But a bit of digging around and you can find out a lot about, if you scratch below the surface of what employers say they want and they value, and then however you can to find out as much as you can about people's experiences of working in that arena, that profession and or that organization, then you can go into that situation better informed, better prepared psychologically. So if you know that, okay, well, it's important, but it's not that important for you, and there are other things, then you're psychologically prepared if you know that, it's not so great and it's not necessarily the most important thing right now, but then you're psychologically prepared as you go in and you make that decision that, for the next 2 years, I'm prepared to, suck it up and work really long hours. Say, for example, people that are just starting in the profession of law, I just use that as an example. It's not to say that every legal profession, but we know it's commonly known that those going into law is that certainly those earlier years and latter years can be, but again, there's a lot of variables in there. Does that make sense? So I think it's great that you have seen where those gaps are, because it's almost like they're red flags, not red flags in that there's trouble there, but red flags for you to have a look at so you can really be prepared. So personality, so for example, are you introverted? Are you extroverted? Are you more kind of logical, or are you more creative in your thinking? So the Myers-Briggs personality test looks at the two, they're extremes of one another, just as an example. So kind of, do you see, like when you think, do you see colours, patterns and opportunity, or do you see things in a really sort of, well, that's a dog and that's a cat, if you look at a picture, for example. But then that can really help you in terms of, it may not necessarily help you in the job interview, but it will help you in terms of understanding yourself and understanding how you would fit, say, for example, within a team and those sorts of things. So technically speaking, the Myers-Briggs personality test, employers can't use it. They'd love to use the Myers-Briggs personality test to get the right collection of personalities within a group, but they're not allowed to. But once they have a team of people, then leaders will actually do the Myers-Briggs personality to better understand the people in their teams. So it can be helpful for you to know. So there's some simple ones: introverted versus extroversion. I can't remember how many categories there are. I think there's 6 categories and 24 different personality types in there. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's a really, and values is a really, there's lots of online, because it's connected to coaching. They do a lot of stuff in coaching, positive psychology. I think there's probably stuff part of my background is in positive psychology, and there's a website, I think he has some value stuff, but any coaching stuff, I have a spot psychology right there. There's lots and lots of stuff on values, because they use it in, so they use it in positive psychology, they use it in coaching, they use it in career coaching, they use it in leadership, so that there should be lots of free resources around values. We had a comment in there. Yes, thank you, Susan. Awesome. I might click thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I might actually flick the recording on, unless anybody's got something that they'd like to share or ask, because I'd like to dive more deeply into that, but like the others at home to be able to hear it. Did anybody else want to share about gaps, like that Katie sort of realised that there were some areas that perhaps she could just spend a bit more time looking into? Any awarenesses? Oh yeah, Mary, tell me, is there anything you'd like to share?
Hi, can you hear me? Am I
Yes.
coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, just to add, well, the ones for me that kind of stuck out were like values.
Yeah.
And when I thought of values, I immediately thought of, okay, what do I value? So I put that down as family and friends. So that equal to work-life balance, which you've mentioned. When again, looking at personality, I reflected back on myself being a very quiet sort of individual. So again, coming to be an introvert, but then how does that help me in terms of my career prospects? So that's again, something that I need to look deeper into.
Well, and I think, yeah.
But the one that kind of was like, I kept thinking on or about was motivation, because there's two kind of angles I was looking at in terms of how do I motivate myself, and also the environment that I'm in, what kind of environment it is. So, the working environment, and also looking at if I'm, again, and I sort of tied this in line with my goals when I'm trying to work or in personal life, am I happy? So that's like personal life, but then in terms of my career, what's the goal there? Obviously, it'll be a competent and diligent worker at whatever task that I'm given. But then, sorry, I'm kind of going off track a bit. But
not at all.
like motivation for me is like kind of the key here. So I'm just like tying it in terms of my career success and tips. I think I need more tips on motivation, really, because again, for me, it's looking at the work environment and the kind of leadership they have there, because that would really motivate me.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, great. So do you mind if I expand on all of that a little bit through each of them with that slide up, with the slide on? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, cool. Because you've made some really good points, and you've brought motivation. So I'll get, yeah, definitely. Okay, let's do that. Let's see. Okay, so actually So welcome back, everyone. We just took a moment, and I hope that if you're listening from home, that you've taken some time to, as those that are in with us live in this session have done, to reflect on areas where you feel as though you're not really sure, and that you could act on those, or communicate those in a way that would be evidenced in terms of your level of confidence. So, we've got another Mary here. Hello, Mary. We're just talking. We kicked off a little bit slowly this morning, so you're most welcome, and I'm so glad that you're here live. We're just today we're just covering an overview of all of the elements that make up the career success. So we're talking about self-awareness, and those that are here, they've just taken a bit of time to reflect on perhaps where they don't have a lot of knowledge. So if you can see in the chat box, Mary, that's just arrived, you'll see some extra resources that I've popped in here. So we've had a couple of great comments and feedback. And one of the things that's come up that someone has shared about is knowing the company's culture, the organization's culture. So finding out what you can about the company culture. Now, culture really fits into values. That's its closest alignment, really. And culture can be hard to determine until you get into an organization, what the culture is really like, because you need to sort of experience it, breathe it. But it's closely aligned with values. And my only or my top suggestion around knowing what a company culture is like before you go in there is research. And so it's talking to and reading as much as you can about what that place is like to work at. And so that might be one of the things that that I personally have started to do is when there's organizations that I'm curious about, or primarily organizations or people, individuals that I am curious about in my profession, or more broadly where my profession extends. This is one thing that you can, and you guys can actually start, you can do this now, is get onto your LinkedIn and make sure that your LinkedIn, and we'll talk about LinkedIn a bit later on, make sure that your LinkedIn in the title, it has the things that you're particularly interested in. So let's just use the example of, say, international education. So you'd put in your title international education, and maybe you're doing a PhD in international education and offshore partnerships. So you'd put the word offshore partnerships, right? Then what you want to do is find as many people and as many organizations that interest you. So maybe you want to work for the Department of Foreign Affairs, or maybe you want to work for private corporate company called Global Partners, right? So you connect with them. And even though you'll be a PhD student or a master's student, if you've got the right terms in the top of your LinkedIn, 99% of the time they'll be like, oh, well, they can see why, even though you've never met, that they'll want to connect. Start following those organizations and start watching what those individuals say, how they communicate their values, how they communicate on LinkedIn, what sorts of things they post, who their relationships with are. And that will give you an additional way in the lead up to making a final, and also it will help you prepare yourself for what you need, because you'll decide pretty quickly after a while, after you see their posts and both individuals in that. And I'll just use that area, international education. Find as many people as you can, and it's harder in the earlier stages because you have to get people to get access to people, but it's good to start that now. And then start seeing how those people behave and those organizations behave and then how those employees of those organizations behave in that environment, because it's kind of like a micro world on LinkedIn, or whether it's Twitter or social media, if it's, whatever else you want to, maybe it's a cottage industry you want to start, or fashion or beauty or whatever it is. So find where you can kind of observe the real behavior and the values and how these organizations and individuals communicate their values, and then you can get a greater sense of what that culture is really, what it's really like to work there. Because you can still do all your research, but you need culture is is largely culture comes from the top all the way down, right? So the more you can find out what happens at the top of that machine and all the way down and how that's impacting those people, the better informed you'll be about what that and how aligned that is with your values, all right? And you, as I said, you won't have all the answers, but what I can say to you is that if you do the work that's needed to be done, or not needs to be done, but that is most respectful to yourself in honoring, and again, without sounding like a hippie, but honoring yourself in terms of going into this next transition, well-informed, confident, done your research, it's likely that you will communicate authentically, and the employer is that you're going to be attracting or communicating with, they're either going to like it or they're not, all right? Yes, please, Susan. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks. Are you ready to leave the recording on?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. No secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've recently moved to a new area and I was looking for work. Did the usual handing out the resume stuff. And a couple of companies, I did a bit of a into Google search.
Yes.
And the company that I'm currently working for actually support Orange Sky, who are the people who do the showers and the laundry.
Yep. Incredible.
I've been working with the homeless for over 30 years. So straight away,
wow.
I learned two things from that, is that they support an organisation that I support, and they are not necessarily about, although they're a high-end company, they're not necessarily fixated just on the bottom line. They actually want to use what they've got to, I guess, for the betterment of society. So straight away that resonated with me. So I got called in for the interview, and when I met the young lady who's my manager, like, she is well over half my age, but we just clicked straight away because we have the same heart of caring about people. So it's not necessarily about only selling a product. And I said to her, you know, like, I was looking for some keywords on the website. So, you know, what are customers really looking for? And it's not a product. It's generally a feeling. You know, do they want a product that is clean, crisp, hospital corners, efficient, professional, or do they like the country quilts, the hot chocolate by a fireplace, sitting at grandma's house kind of feeling? And if you can narrow that down, it helps you to give the customer what they're actually looking for, which is the product that invokes those feelings. And her and I, we were on the same page from day dot as to, you know, how to give a customer what they're really looking for. And the fact that they support an organisation that I'm 100% behind was, and they sell their products as well. So it's just like, you know, win-win. Walking in that day for the interview, every member of staff that was on the floor just radiated like so much positivity. It was like I was a long lost friend that they hadn't seen for 20 years, the way their faces lit up. And that is normal. That is a normal culture component that I fell in love with. So they don't paste on the plastic smiles. They genuinely are happy to see customers, to find out how they can serve a customer. And even if that means they don't sell the customer anything on that day, the customer's going to come back because they've left the store feeling really heard. And I love all of that. And so that was, I picked up some of the stuff on the website, but for me, actually rocking up on the day of the interview, in being around the people, was like, yeah, I could work here. And so, you know, I got offered the position and I took it straight away because it was exactly the sort of place I want to work at. So I've been there 3 months now, and we've just done our goal setting for the next financial year. And again, my goals align with the company goals. So that was a very, very positive outcome. And I had so much imposter syndrome going in, because I haven't been in retail, let alone high-end retail. Well, not high-end, I've never done that, but I haven't been in retail for probably over 20 years. So to be able to step into the job and I just fit right in, it's such a positive feeling, because I was getting very, very discouraged, like that young man, you know, about trying this, trying that. It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. Thank you so much for sharing that, because when you guys come in here and share these, you articulated that 10,000 times better than I ever could, because you've experienced it. And what you have actually shared with us is exactly what I, you know, if I could come up with an example, I might take your permission to use that example one day.
Feel free.
Thank you.
And if you want to PM, if you want me to PM you, I can send you the name of the company so you can pop in.
So beautiful, because actually you've encapsulated everything that I'm trying to say in this slide. Because, and I actually got tingles halfway, because you are motivated, yeah? Your skills will be valued, your skills will just slot right in there, yeah? You talked about your goals and they were in line with the organization's goals. I hadn't even got to goals. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you want to buy a different house and they don't want to buy a different house, you know, you want to upsize or downsize or whatever. But it means that what you're hoping to achieve day to day in your work, what you are driven and motivated to achieve, what are the outcomes of how you want that customer to leave, how you want to be engaged in your work, what is your ultimate goals, that they feel to the best of your ability that is in line with in line with you. And also that beautiful analogy that the Orange Sky organization, which is an amazing example of how an organization grows anyway, because I don't know every detail about it, but what I do know is that it was started by two friends, I believe, and they saw a need for homeless people to have their clothes cleaned, and that gave them dignity. And I think they just started with one car. And so I just think it's really, but I also think that if you know what's important to you, there is an element of attracting that. So although on one hand it's quite a coincidence that Susan, you know, attracted that organization, but on the other hand, I think actually she was pretty clear, like knows, although she'd had some challenges, knows what is important to her, and managed to, you know, make that alignment. However she communicated with that employer, that connection was there. And before I read that next chat there, I want to just finish this by also talking about Mary's comment about motivation. And she made a couple of really good points about, you know, when I first introduced motivation, I was talking about what, you know, what motivates you, what excites you and drives you, but also as Mary really importantly highlights, like what motivates you in work and in a job, right? They're one and the same, but they're also, you know, they're also different in that one of the things that demotivates employees the most is not having any sense. I remember just reading this statistic recently, not having any sense of power over their own work. That is the number one, according to a statistic recently. Now, but some people are okay to to work in roles where it doesn't necessarily mean they're disempowered, but where they're happy to be told what to do, and they're still motivated by being told what to do. But other people are more motivated by having their own autonomy and their own opportunity to make decisions for themselves. So, and as Mary said, related to, things like leadership, what does that leadership look like? And I think also there's different times in your life, different stages of your life where you're motivated and your needs are different. But it is a really important component. And remembering that, I think when I first started sort of thinking about self-awareness, and teaching into this stuff in professional development, I think it was about 12 years ago, I used to sort of think of things being a little bit more static, in that we have something called what's called career anchors. And they're those things that you're not willing to negotiate. So just thinking about that, what those anchors are for you. Just any comments? Oh, main goal is to build tiny house communities, help people, beautiful, out of homelessness. Lovely. All right. I think we've spent quite a lot of time on that, and I'm conscious that people will have come for, so in the lead up to knowing who you are, you need to know what's out there for you. And what's out there for you, what we often do is we sit at home and think, I'll go on to LinkedIn, onto Seek and onto Career One, and we sit there passively and go, and it's really common, oh, there's no jobs. But in fact, 80% of jobs are not advertised. And in the lead up to getting that next job, or whether it's your graduate position or part-time work, there are a multitude of ways that are much more effective in terms of what is out there. So we have the self-awareness, and then we have the opportunity awareness. So again, if you can take a screenshot of this, or just have a look at it when the slides come. But just remember that but you may not know this, right now you have a chance to build a few extra, say, tools in your kit bag, right, in order to be a different graduate when you pop out. And so you can actually do that by doing a little bit of work experience. SCU offers work experience opportunity, where you can have the university's insurance. Some of you guys might have the opportunity to do placement. Volunteering, there are volunteers needed everywhere at the moment. Part-time work, joining an association, your LinkedIn. There are a multitude of ways, small and relatively easy ways, that you can differentiate yourself to make yourself unique as that unique candidate. So that could be, I'll just give you a really quick example of what that might look like. You join your industry association. Ooh, when an employer reads your resume, that's like, oh, cool, they're really interested in, the hospitality industry. Get your LinkedIn looking nicely. Just make sure your LinkedIn, we'll talk about LinkedIn briefly at the end. Conduct some information interviewing, which is really, asking people. You can ask people for a virtual coffee. So perhaps there's someone who's doing the work, or somebody more senior. Maybe you're thinking about social work and you've got a friend of a family who's a social worker. Do a little bit of an interview with them. There are career expos. So what happens is that the old model is we go to uni, we study, and then sometimes we do an internship, and then we go out and look for a job. And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it doesn't. The good thing is, at the moment, you guys are really empowered to be able to, the power is with the employees at the moment, and will increasingly be so. But who knows what will happen, because things, 2 years ago, the power, hundreds and thousands of people across the globe lost their jobs, and now we have a huge skills gap. So it doesn't mean that in 2 years' time. So the great thing for you guys is that certainly until the next couple of years, that you've got the power, which means you've got more options, which you can create more opportunities for yourself by looking at and considering a multi-pronged approach rather than the just do your resume and then look for a job on Seek. So here's just some example of what the visible job market is here. So 20% of jobs are advertised online. That means 80% of jobs are not advertised. And so the more people you can connect with on your LinkedIn, going to networking functions if they're available to you, joining your professional associations, going to any micro-learning, anything that's just about anything that's free, you've come along here. So you are well and truly on your way. Looking at, so these are just some ways where you can approach both the visible and your personal branding. We will do a bit of it in this series. We did a lot in September. Again, you might like to take a screenshot of this. And what I have genuinely done is thinking about who the connections are, and then literally writing names or organizations or who those people are next to those areas when considering things that I want to do in my professional life and who I may be able to contact. The best way to network is to help other people. So as many people as that you can help in your own network. You're helping people by being here and by sharing in here. I'm really, really grateful, but no pressure either as well. But that is where, if this little list here, that's your gold mine to really finding a job. And what we do is, I don't know if I've got the slide here. Oh, no, I haven't. Is that we look for work in the opposite way that actually work appears. So employers look within people, within the organization, and they look within the people of the people. And then eventually when they can't find anybody, they put up one of those advertisements. And we look for work naturally in the opposite way to the way that work appears. So just be proactive and take a really targeted approach. And we'll talk about elevator pitches another time. Ask questions. People really love to help. So ask people for help. And here's just a few other ways that you can, I'm just going to write in the chat box here a couple of things that have been really helpful for MOOCs. There's something called MOOCs, and they're massive online classrooms. I'm a huge fan, and they're free. Well, you can do them for free, but if you want the certificate to put in your LinkedIn, they are amazing, and they have a MOOC on just about everything. So they're called massive online classrooms, and they're run by really big universities: Stanford, Berkeley, UCLA, Brown University, American universities, British universities, Scottish universities, Australian universities. And they're short courses that you can do. So if you've got a specific area of interest, then you can do one of those courses to really start to build that particular story, but also, you do it from an authentic place of something you're really interested in. Do a short course, but then you'll go, oh, that's cool. And then you learn something else and you're like, oh, I want to do a course on that and that and that. And then what that does is it starts to tell a different story about who you are. And that's tells a story about more, what you are uniquely, and that point of differentiation. So if you have a graduate that's just popped out and they've just got their PhD, great, they may have got first class honours, excellent, amazing. But if they've got nothing else, then they may not be the best candidate than the person that perhaps hasn't got first class honours, but they've done some volunteering and they've got, you know, academic papers that they've written, and they're in the association and they've done some extra short courses and they're volunteering in that sector, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't mean you have to do all of that, but even a little bit of that is the way that really differentiates you and creates more opportunities for you. I'm conscious that I haven't given you a break, but I don't want you to leave, because I'm going to just quickly go through the resume, cover letter component. I know there's a lot in here. I could talk for, well, we will. We talk for hours and hours on each of these things, but I want to make sure that I spend the next hour going through resume, just a snapshot of my top tips, resume, cover letter, interview, and that is it. And then we'll take some questions at the end. So please stick around if you can, and I'll see you guys. We might just take, I know it's quite tiring. Normally I try to take a break at 10 o'clock, but we just got started a little bit later. We will come back in 5 minutes, and just, you know, if it's a lot to take in, just start folding the washing so that then, oh, because it's so boring, but just so that if there's anything that a little take home, you know, even if it's just blah, blah, blah for you, there's a take home in there that gives you just something that might be helpful in this next step, in this next stage. So I'll see you guys at at 25 past. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. Just really quickly, again, I'm going to send the slides. If you're at home, please reach out to me if you want a copy of the slides and you're listening from home and you didn't register for this. Please feel free. Otherwise, take a screenshot of the things that are helpful for you, so that you've just going through this process, that you remember some of the things to communicate. So these
Yeah.
You're right, Mary. Welcome back. These are these are the generic and non-technical and transferable skills that employers are telling us that they currently want. Now, the order changes slightly. What hasn't changed for a really long time, and probably ever not going to change, is that they want communication. That's both oral and written. Teamwork is pretty much always there. Some of these other things, cultural alignment, so it's great given what we've spent a lot of time talking about today. Work experience, and I think it's amazing, and I almost want to like shout to the rafters about this one, and I'm so pleased that you guys are here, because as university students, we can assume that because we go to university, we're then equipped and have what the employers want. And I know that's really a hard fact, but in just a little bit of work experience in any form, and or the experience that you have communicates its relevance, then that is wonderful. So you don't have to have, if you're studying environmental science, marine science, you don't necessarily have, and you're doing a PhD, you don't have to have paid experience in marine science. But whatever work that you experience that you do have, that you can communicate both the technical and or employability related skills, of which these are. Okay. So I think we've established that you never use a generic cover letter. My strongest suggestion in terms of how to really make this process work, as Susan said, it's tiring. It really, really is tiring. And I totally agree. One way to avoid the tiringness is to, or limit it, is to work through your network, and then you can often send an expression of interest, or you can just send your resume. It's one way. But in most cases, you will have to write some sort of form of, depending on, if you're going into government, corporate, where there has to be an element that demonstrates no lack of nepotism, so to speak. You will have to do some sort of cover letter. So here are my top tips. Guidelines to stand out. Customize it for each role, but I would work on a sliding scale. So say you see a couple of jobs and you want one more than others. Be really discerning about how much energy you put in. You really want that job, scale it back from the most you want that job all the way back. So you really, really want that job, spend much more time on that cover letter, and then you can kind of manage the emotional investment and the energy that goes into the process. Address it to always send it to, try to find out the employer's name. Use keywords, and I was going to say I could talk half a day about this. Luckily next week we're coming back to talk about resumes and cover letters, because there's lots of things that, again, like, I don't profess to know everything, but I have learned things from my own mistakes that I'd like to share with you in more detail next week. But and I'll talk more about this next week, is that keywords. So keywords, because employers use what we call automatic tracking systems, I believe that there are amazing young and older people out there in the workforce that aren't getting jobs because they don't understand how to use keywords with automatic tracking systems with cover letters and resumes. So keywords are really important, and I'll expand a bit more on that later on. So I just make sure I give, stick to the overview. One page, but I would always say just follow the instructions. So if they say they want one page, give them one page. If they say they want 2 pages, you give them 2 pages. So don't make any assumptions about what they do or don't want. Give them what they ask for in the job advertisement. Concise paragraphs. So I generally like to go for between 4 and 6 sentences per paragraph, but that's probably for, it depends on what sort of job, but not 1 or 2 sentences in a paragraph. And make sure that your paragraph has an opening statement, a couple of sentences that link, and a closing statement. strictly speaking. Indicate you're looking forward to meeting them, not that you hope to meet them. First impressions, I like your first paragraph to have a hook in there. So that might be some relevant work experience you have. It might be that you're doing honours and you're doing first class honours. It might be that you're, that you already have a small business and you're studying business. So put something in there that is a point of difference. And that, again, that comes back to your uniqueness. You all have a story. And I think what can be really hard is knowing what your story is. So that's where at the end of this series, I'm going to work with anybody that wants to work with me in terms of some complimentary sessions, but also the careers team. They can help you, kind of unpack some of this stuff about what does make you unique. So need a hook. Again, you might like to, I'll send all the slides at the end of the series. So everybody that's registered for the workshops, you'll get a copy of all the slides. But this is what it, and we've put in here things, if you follow this format with your cover letter, and next week I'm going to go into all of this in more detail, you will be streets, literally streets ahead of others that don't, because sometimes employers these days say, oh, cover letter's optional, and you give people an option, often they'll take it out. That's pretty normal. You go that one step further and you're already in the game. Formatting is really important, but I'll go through all of the details of that. Visually, it needs to be appealing, and that's wide margins, decent font size, but most importantly, that you're giving examples. Well, not most importantly, because you could have some great examples in there, but if it's really untidy and it's presented poorly, then it won't be effective. So actually, in fact, I've kind of contradicted myself. It's all important. But what is also really important is the evidence of what you have done in those previous roles and in your life that's relevant to the work that you are applying for. Here's my top tips on resumes, and just bear in mind I am going quite quickly, but it is an overview. I did spend quite a lot of time, setting you up this morning around the self-awareness, and I know people don't want to go there, they just want to do the resume, but I cannot express to you how important that setup, that foundation for you is before you dive into, because then also this all flows a lot more easily because you're then able to look for the right work and then communicate it. So that setup is really important. So this is the order. Now there are variables on this. And I'll keep it brief, and you're going to have a cover letter in most instances. As I said, they'll give you an option. I always take the option, always, always. Even on LinkedIn, it'll say quick apply. And sometimes I see like a job come up. I think, oh, that looks interesting. And it'll have like a quick apply on there. And then suddenly 10 people have applied. And I think, oh, wow, I wonder what the quality of their applications are. So if you take an extra few hours, to pop together, even a little brief expression of interest, it will look, it's not necessarily, you don't have to be the first in the door, so to speak. An hour or 2 hours later, you're not going to miss out, but if you take a bit of care. Resume, cover letter, selection criteria. I can't remember whether I'm talking about it next week or the week after. It can be really confusing for people, and there's many variables, but I will explain more about where selection criteria in the format that I'm showing you here. It's when it's a government role, or always in the public sector, there has to be some sort of what they call selection criteria. And that is the criteria that they use to measure you against others. It's supposed to be for transparency, but we all, if you listen to the news, you may or may not be aware of the John Barilaro case, of which was, supposed to be a transparent process. And then the head government lead in that lost their job because of lack of transparency. I'm about to have a gender debate there because I'm a bit frustrated that the woman involved and then the male politicians, one of them did go down, but that a woman took the fall for it because there were other men involved. But anyway, the point being that it is essentially supposed to be to avoid any sort of nepotism, any sort of inappropriate recruitment. We still know, anyone that's worked in academia still knows that, and in government, as that example illustrates, it still happens, but it's certainly, it is supposed to be in a situation exactly what happened when there's an auditing and they need to be able to say, well, how does this person meet the criteria? Do they have a working with children's check? Do they have a police clearance, etc., etc. Now, the online application form, there's a lot of, and I'll talk more about all of that next week, or the week after. There's lots and lots of variables on all of that. And then sometimes there's a bit of really frustrating duplication. So for example, you have to upload it onto Seek, but then there'll be a website and then you have to, it links to their website and then you have to go to the website and you think, oh, I'm almost done. I've done this and this and this. And then you go to their website and you've got to fill in everything on the website. And by this time, of course, you're all exhausted. So just be prepared for that the person that's advertising or the organisation that's advertising through Seek, or there might be a recruiter and then you have to add all your details. So just plan your time or plan your exhaustion. That would be my suggestion in terms of the process can be really tiring. So, and again, I would just say spend more time on what you really, really want. It is still really tiring. I've got a colleague that's been going through the academic recruitment process, and she's had so many close calls, and she just said to me the other day she's just exhausted. So I do know how exhausting the process is. How to stand out with your resume. Some of the principles from the cover letter apply, and that comes right back to that second slide. How do you communicate your suitability, tailoring it to the job, tailoring it to the job advertisement? Now, once you get a good resume and you're applying for similar jobs and you're getting a hit, and I call it a hit when you apply for a job and somebody likes your resume or cover letter. Oh, sure. My pleasure. See you soon. Hopefully you can come along again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for coming. It's just helpful to have beings here. Beautiful. All right. So the cover letter, sorry, your resume, once you've got a hit, you don't need to change it every single time, but I would always tweak, like, if you use the Hayes template, they've got like a competency section. You can tweak that. It takes 5 minutes to slightly change the words. You're going to have a career profile at the beginning, or a professional profile at the beginning. Tweak that, and then but your summary of key skills, if you're consistently applying for similar jobs, you won't need to. So you're going to put a lot of work in initially, then start tweaking it. Put it through Resume Worded. Get the SCU careers team to look at it. Actually get a human to look at it, then put it through a machine. That would be my suggestion, because the machine ultimately judges you for that first round. It cleans out 80 or 90% of applicants. So get a human to give you some feedback and then make sure the machine loves it. But these are the general headings. There's variables on each of these. Again, you might like to work with myself or with one of the careers team. There might be slightly different terms. Yeah, there's lots to talk about in there, but I'll talk about it all in more detail. I think it's next week or the week after. Again, you might like to take a screenshot if you can't come, or whatever works for you guys. All I care about is that you get the information that will be helpful for you, and however that works with what you need to do. But this is generally most good resumes. The samples that are out there in those main platforms have a general, there's a lot of similarities. So it doesn't matter whether you use an SCU template or a Hayes template. Essentially what employers say that they want is that they want achievements. They want to know what you have achieved not what you've just done in the role. So we'll work on that more. So you want to make sure that your achievements are specific. So, and when you put your resume through Resume Worded, and don't be alarmed if you get a score. I remember in another capacity, I've got a lady who's a trainer. I've worked with her for a little over 12 months. She's amazing at what she does. And she didn't know about Resume Worded. And I said, oh, and she said, oh, hang on a minute, I'm just going to chuck my resume in there. And she got 25%. And I was like, don't worry, because it's brutal. But it's brutal in a good way, because you don't need to take it personally. It's telling you this is what the computer thinks of your resume. But it's a really good way. Then it tells you, you can get it, you can put it in there. I think it's about 12 or 13 times for free. You can get it up to about 85%. It's hard work, up to 85% without having to pay. So I'd strongly suggest that you use Resume. It's the best tool that I know of, not to say there isn't other great tools. And the reason I bring it up now is because when you're putting your achievements in there, it really wants metrics. So it wants to know how much you raised the money. What specifically were your sporting achievements? What level did you get at? It wants action words. It's looking for action verbs, and it's looking for metrics. So it wants to know, if you improved efficiencies by what percentage. So people often say to me, well, I don't know how much you just put an approximate, increase revenue by approximately 35% if you don't know metrics, because often people don't know what the metrics are. Really quickly on the automatic tracking systems, I'm going to talk more about those in coming weeks, because it is really, 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 really important. Because as I said, I feel really sad that there are people at home that don't know that it's actually a computer. People say to me, oh, I don't hear back from employers, and it's so painful, the whole process. But it's actually often, it's not a computer, it's a computer that's reading you before a human being. A human being hasn't even touched it. It just goes bum bum. So here's some tips. You might like to take a screenshot. One of the things that the automatic, I'll talk more about all of that next, but one of the things that the automatic tracking system hates is formatting. Even so much as, for example, LinkedIn, you can build a resume from your LinkedIn. And if you put that resume format from LinkedIn through the automatic tracking system, it friggin' hates it, which is, again, like, there's probably amazing corporates out there that it's like, oh, awesome, I've got a free thing, and it's got all this formatting in there. The automatic tracking system hates. SCU careers team, so they have awesome staff. Susie, she's just been away on leave for a couple of months with some surgery. She normally comes along in the beginning of these sessions. She's just come back on board. She may come in the weeks ahead, but I'm working in conjunction with her and the Postgraduate Association as that conduit in the middle. The SCU careers team, this is just their landing page here. So all of these sample resumes, they're all there. Like, if you don't want to use the Hayes one, and you don't want to meet with me at the end of this series, or it doesn't suit your time frame, there's all these, and they've spent a lot of time recently tidying this all up. So those little tabs there are just really, really helpful in terms of being able to send you. And they also have industry specific resumes, which are just amazing. So a social work one, a psychology one, they don't have one for everything. Also at the moment, because it's an employee's market, hot jobs, lots and lots of hot doggity jobs. I'm just going to have a glance at the time. Oh yeah, all good. Whoopsie. Sorry about that. I'm just going to spend a few minutes going through the interview, my top tips for interviews. And actually, I like to think of the whole, and I guess that's why when I put this series together that I start with an overview of a picture. and that we break it down into, because all these, although it's one thing happens after another, they're all interconnected. So because you will have done all of that foundational stuff, you know, as who was it that Susan, you know, talked about doing the research for the organization. You're going to communicate that in your cover letter, and you're going to communicate that in your resume. But also, one of the things that they ask you many times is they'll say, well, what do you know about the organization? So we won't do this. We won't do this quiz, but that's one of the common questions. And also, I'll come back to this. Is that they'll ask you what you know about the organisation. I'll work backwards actually. Here we go. So, but what I have observed is that it doesn't matter whether you know, unemployed and haven't been in the workplace for a long time, or even if you are a top graduate who, you know, has been excelled in your placement and or you're, you know, a PhD student doing brilliantly with, you know, your papers and research. Most people find that first question. So again, this brings us right back to where I appeared to probably spend way too much time, right back to the beginning again, because if you haven't spent that time to really reflect on what you're going to contribute, it's going to be really hard to authentically and effectively communicate that when you guys come together. So at the interview stage, you're going to be 90% of the way through the process. You still need to convince them again of your fit. And if you do your work, your legwork at the beginning, and you look for the employer that is the good fit, and you do all those other things that we've suggested, there's a really good chance you're going to be able to do it naturally. But the more prep you put in terms of being able to talk about yourself. So what happens is, and we'll do a little bit of this in the interview workshop that we'll do specifically in the next couple of weeks, is that we'll talk about, it's called the elevator pitch. Mary would be familiar with this, is where it's really like you can practice it in your networking setting, you can practice it with your friends, you can practice it, you know, wherever you can. But often what happens is you go in, one of the first questions they will ask you is, tell us about yourself. And that's just like, oh, that's awkward. Because in Australia, we have like the whole kind of tall poppy thing, and we're not supposed to talk about ourselves, and we're not supposed to value ourselves, and all that sort of hoo-ha that goes on if we say too much. That's really awkward. But what I find most, I've only actually ever, in 2 instances doing mock interviews, have I ever actually heard somebody oversell themselves. One was with a lawyer, but he worked really hard. He took on the feedback and he just kind of toned it down a little bit. And one was an older postgraduate, you know, really successful, but it kind of it was just too much. So most of the time, people really undersell. Well, that's it. 98% of the time, in my experience working on this particular component, people undersell them. And it's not even about selling. It's about, you know, as we were talking about earlier, like communicating your value and what you can contribute to their customers or clientele. Because essentially, wherever you're going to go and work, it will be a business. You're going into education, you're going into the Defence Force, you're going into academia. Yeah, it's still a business that will have goals like we talked about. So this is one of the places that I find that everybody, well, not everybody, but mostly people struggle the most. So we'll spend some time talking about this. SCU has, in fact, there was this tool that you can practice. And we'll talk about all the different types of resumes, interviews, and how they look at the moment, you know, in the pandemic, or or whatever, we're in post-pandemic era, how they look. Just want to quickly scoot back here. Grooming is important. They say that an employer will make a judgment about whether they like you and whether that you fit into the role within the first couple of minutes. And a lot of that is based on that visual presentation, which can be really, you know, that's quite a confronting consideration, really. But what it is, it's not necessarily, of course, it's things that can be discriminated against, but also it's more, it's that, of course, but it is also when they look at you, they want to see that the way that you have presented yourself to them is someone that they can see in their office. And so they want to be able to see that you're going to be able to fit into, and you're going to look like you fit within your whole sort of persona looks like it will fit within their team. And I'll give you an example next time we come about my own experience of getting that completely wrong. And I'm happy to share my shame with you. But it was an instance, no, I don't need to just, I was going to say it's an instance where I was overdressed rather than underdressed. It was fine, but I really didn't do my legwork. So the quickest thing, in case you don't come back for that one, scoot around to the organization, have a look what they're wearing, and then make sure you're just a better version of that in terms of how you present yourself. So eye contact, pretty hard in a Zoom environment, but doesn't matter whether you're talking on the phone or whether you're talking in Zoom, people can still pick up on hesitation. They can still pick up on so much, although you are not physically in the room. Interviewer by name, being on time. So in a Zoom setting, so for example, many of it will be on Teams, just make sure you're sitting in that waiting room. I always say 10 minutes beforehand, because otherwise, if you plan to be there within 2 minutes, it'll be the day your computer shuts down. Visualizations. I'll give you some really cool tips on how to prepare for the interview that I have used personally. And I've spoken to people that have used them and have had really, really great success with those. If you don't get to come back, one of them is by a lady called Amy Cuddy. So I'm not forcing you to come back. She's awesome. She's on YouTube. Interview preparation, research, we've talked about that. See if you can find out who's coming to the interview. I wouldn't suggest trying to connect with the interviewers. You can find out who they are. I wouldn't try to become friends with them on LinkedIn before the interview, because that could be deemed like, just if it says to just be a bit, take that bit, I've got a bit of a grey area around that. Video interviews we'll talk about next week. Here are, you might like to take a screenshot of the top tip, the top skills sought at an interview. You'll notice that they were things that come across. So here are some of the things that I have highlighted quite emphatically around getting some sort of work experience. The great thing for you guys that as opposed to 2 and/or 3 years ago, the opportunity to gain experience in the workforce is tenfold of what it was a couple of years ago. So in the past, it was really difficult 2.5, 3 years ago. Students couldn't even get a part-time job. So it was really, really hard for people to get any experience. So the times have changed. So it's in your hands a lot more. All right. Join us next week here. We have three more workshops coming up. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'd like to take any questions that you guys had. I know there's a lot, and your minds are probably like, woo, that was a lot. But just bear in mind, each of those will be, I won't spend a lot of time coming up about, unpacking the self-awareness stuff. We're going to go into the specifics. But I'll probably just contextualize it at the beginning of each and bring it up throughout for those that come and miss those that missed the big ta-da. All right. Any questions? Anything burning that you'd like to know? Katie, was that helpful for you?
Yeah, that was great, Beck. Thank you so much. I don't think I have any questions that are popping up to me right now, but I'll definitely be here next week too. So
awesome.
If any come to me during the week, I'll write them down so I can remember.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's wonderful. Great question here. How do you fight imposter syndrome? I think that's a great question. I have never been asked that, but it is common. It is so common. I think the first thing that comes to mind is authenticity, in that our society is so driven on having to be an expert and having to be perfect. And I think that if, you're studying and you've worked in a particular field, you're allowed to be in that space. Yeah. And I think it's just thinking about the value of your contribution. Yeah, imposter syndrome is like, is that you've got a particular profession, and say you're a social worker, and you're in your early years, or you're even in the latter years of your work as a social worker. You've studied your social work degree and you've done your internship and your placement and you've volunteered. And then you suddenly, you're at that point where you've got your registration, and then you're doing counselling, and you've got all the qualifications, you've got tons of work experience, you've studied, you've worked really hard to get there, and then suddenly you've got your first clients in a counselling setting, and you suddenly think, oh, I'm just playing a role here. I know nothing. And you struggle. It's like you'd be afraid that somebody's going to tap on your shoulder and say, hey, you're not allowed to be here. And it's really, really, really common. And my only suggestion, and I'll look into it more because it's come up. Nobody's ever actually asked me the question, but it's come up actually before in the postgrad. I don't know which workshop it was. I think it was this year, this idea of imposter syndrome. So I'll look more into it. The only thing that comes to mind is working on not necessarily having to be an expert, but thinking about how you can contribute. Because really what work is, I was thinking, and I've not the first time I've thought this, is that all the work that we do on the planet, working in a service station, as an educator, in a garden, as a horticulturalist, it's contributing to something on the planet. Washing cars, it doesn't matter what you're doing. So if you think of your work as a contribution, then or how you can contribute, you don't need to judge whether it is or isn't, is that then you can come to that space without having to judge yourself about whether you're good enough or not, but you're doing your best and you're adding to that environment. So I think there's a guy on SBS, and they called him the happiest. There was a story about him, an international gentleman, and he works in a service station in Western Sydney. And he's known all over his community because he does that job, and he does that job with gusto, and that is his contribution, and he loves it. And so I think that's the only thing that comes to mind. I don't know if that's helpful. Is that helpful, Susan? Or not helpful, or is it?
Yes, thank you. It did. I had the opportunity to apply for a job as a sales assistant or an assistant manager. And I thought, yeah, so much self-doubt, and I eventually applied for the sales assistant. But in getting to know the assistant manager that was hired, I've realised that I could have applied for the job and probably would have romped it in. But yeah, that imposter syndrome undid me, I'm afraid.
Okay, great. And in fact, I hadn't thought about it from the perspective that you're not even in the role. Okay. And that's really powerful. So, and the next thought that comes to mind, particularly that it's all women in here, is that they say that men will apply for a job that they don't have all the qualifications for significantly over what women will do. And I found that was an interesting statistic. So, so women tend to undervalue themselves, but also my thought too is, and in fact I do notice that in this space, in the postgraduate space, because people are often, we've got a whole different range of students in this postgrad space. We have people that are doing a degree on top of a degree. We have people that have been out of the workforce and then retraining. There's a multitude of, so it's the makeup of students is far more diverse, broadly speaking, than it is with undergraduates. And so what I have observed is what postgraduates and postgraduate students will do is actually do exactly what you said, Susan. And the only thing that can, so I heard somebody else with a really similar story recently. And the only thing that that you can think is, if you wanted to just get a foot back in the door and to sort of see, and then, but also once you're in an organization, the flip side, I'm always kind of looking for the flip side on things. The flip side is that you're actually now in an organization where you like and where you like to be there. So when you are ready and actually start to communicate, if you wanted to, your interest and what you could bring to that role, that invariably the universe will prevail, so to speak. So on one hand, it's disappointing that you didn't go straight into that role that you were easily suitable for. The great thing is that you're in a role, you're in an organization that is in line with who you are. Because when there is that fit, they call it fit when there's the right fit, then it's likely that you will go on and stay and thrive and enjoy being there. And so you may, and also it can be helpful in some ways if you've been out of that role, to rebuild and also to see things from that perspective and then shift into that more senior role again. So although it's been painful, all has not been lost. You know, it could be worse if you're in a terrible company and you should have applied. So I don't know if that helps. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and also I think, Susan, I think that, you know, the power of reflection is, there's a model called Kolb's model of reflection. And what we can do is, is that we can get caught in particular parts of the reflective cycle. And the cycle of reflection is you've reflected. So really so when you can take that reflection into doing something differently next time, you'll know, hang on, this is what I do. I'm gonna have a crack at that bigger picture, that next thing, because I am, you know, and it's changing some of those core beliefs that we have, and we all have them. around what we are or are not worthy of. As Mary has just said, that she had a similar situation where she held back. She felt she didn't, and I hear this commonly in this space, did not check off the boxes. Yes, and that's exactly that point about what men will do. Men will, they won't have all the selection criteria, they'll have a go at it, whereas women will make sure that they have all the selection criteria and they won't apply for the position. Yeah, pretty much sold. Yeah, so yeah, yep, undervaluing. Yep, it's really, 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 it's common for not everybody, not to undervalue your experience, but it is a very common experience because we're all kind of looking outside ourselves and, you know, am I good enough? Am I good enough? At least if the position, I'm observing what yes, that's exactly, yeah, that's exactly, yep. Yes, that's, I agree. So at least if the position comes up, I'm observing, really good. And also you've had that, I think great leaders have that, like once you've worked through the rungs, and you've obviously done it somewhere else, but even better if you get to do it in that organization. So you see what it feels like, experience what it feels like. You have greater compassion and understanding when you're in a more senior role. So, you know, as they say, the universe works in mysterious ways. Yeah, so true. Oh, I totally, oh my God, I so relate. Yep, disqualified ourselves before somebody else does. Yeah. And why do we do that? Because someone else's rejection of us is more, yep. It's totally understand. All right. It's been a pleasure. Any other, I'm conscious of time, we're 7 minutes over here. I've loved having you guys here. Thank you so much for typing your, being here behind the scenes and asking your questions and contributing. And I hope that we get to see you next week or the week after. Yeah, hopefully it's been helpful. Any final questions? Anything that anybody needs? Susan, anything? Was that helpful for you? Thank you, Shobna. Thank you. Thanks, Katie. Lovely to have you here. Thanks, Mary. We love, Susie and I were commenting, we love seeing your name pop up on there. Yeah, we love it. It's like, oh, Mary. We had another Mary. Mary came in and Mary came out again. Miss Mary. But great, you're still, you know, if you don't able to get to come here and join us on a Friday, really what we want it to do is just be we do it often enough, it just becomes a space that people know they can come and drop in, get what they need, stay for the whole time, and know you'll always get the slides. So have a lovely, lovely, lovely rest of day, and thank you so much again. I really, it means a lot to me having you guys here. So I'll see you next week or the week after. And if not, good luck with everything. Bye. Thank you.